I lived for peace. That was the whole reason I bought this dusty stretch of freedom from my grandfather 5 years ago. A few acres of old ranch land right where the county lines blurred. The kind of place where you could hear yourself think. The kind of place that felt like it had a soul. Every morning began the same. I would wake before the sun, pour coffee into my steel thermos, and walk the perimeter with my two rescue dogs, Max and Ryder. They understood the land the way I did. It was more than property. It was sanctuary. My place was simple but solid. A one-story ranch house with weathered wood siding. 2 barns, one for storage and one I had converted into a workshop where I restored classic cars on weekends. Nothing fancy. Nothing that needed improving, just honest living on honest land. I knew about the fancy development that had been creeping closer over the past decade. Sunrise Estates, they called it. All identical houses with identical lawns and identical mailboxes. The kind of place where originality went to die. I never paid them much mind. They were over there, I was over here, the way it should be. That Thursday morning started like any other. I was replacing fence posts along the eastern edge of my property when I spotted an unfamiliar vehicle rolling slowly down my private drive. White SUV, tinted windows, some kind of logo on the door I could not make out from a distance. The vehicle stopped about 50 yards from where I was working. 2 people emerged, a man and a woman, both wearing what looked almost like security guard uniforms but with Sunrise Estates HOA patrol embroidered on their chests. The man carried a tablet. The woman had a clipboard. They walked with purpose, like they were conducting an inspection. Their eyes scanned my property. The woman pointed at my workshop barn. The man nodded and typed something into his tablet. Neither of them had acknowledged my presence yet, despite me standing right there with a post digger in my hands. "Excuse me," I called out, setting my tools down carefully. "Can I help you with something?" The woman startled slightly. She had not expected me to be there. She composed herself quickly and walked toward me with a practiced smile. "Good morning," she called out with a voice too cheerful for someone trespassing. "We are conducting a routine inspection of properties in the expanded jurisdiction zone." "Expanded what?" I asked, removing my work gloves one finger at a time. The man stepped forward now. "Expanded jurisdiction zone. As of last month, this property falls under the Sunrise Estates Homeowners Association guidelines and regulations." I stood up straighter. I am not a small man. Years of working this land had made me solid as the oak trees that lined my driveway. I noticed their eyes widen slightly as I approached. "This is private property," I said calmly. "It has never been part of any homeowners association. It never will be." The woman cleared her throat. "Sir," she said, the word carrying a sudden hesitation, "there have been recent changes to the zoning ordinances. We have documentation." The way she said "sir" caught my attention. It was not respectful, it was cautious, like she was suddenly aware she might be making a mistake. "I would like to see this documentation," I said, stepping closer. "And I would like your names and identification." The man glanced at the woman. Something unspoken passed between them. "We can send the proper documentation through official channels," the man said, his confidence faltering. "But for now, we need to complete our initial assessment." "No," I said firmly but politely. "You do not. This is private property. You are trespassing. I am asking you politely to leave now." The woman's clipboard lowered slightly. "Sir, we have authorization from—" "Not from me," I interrupted. "And I am the only one who can authorize anyone to be on this land. Please return to your vehicle and leave." They hesitated. I could see them recalculating, reassessing. Finally, the man nodded. "We will be in touch through proper channels," he said, attempting to salvage some authority. I watched them retreat to their vehicle, whispering to each other. As they drove away, I knew this was only the beginning. Something had changed. Some invisible line had been crossed, and the peace I had cherished was now under threat. The letter arrived 3 days later, official-looking envelope with the Sunrise Estates logo embossed in gold. I opened it at my kitchen table while the coffee percolated. 2 pages of densely packed text, full of phrases that made my jaw clench. Notice of multiple violations. Visual inconsistency with HOA aesthetic standards. Non-regulated fencing materials. Unauthorized outbuilding structures. Daily compounding fine schedule. According to this document, I was in violation of no fewer than 12 community standards. My workshop barn was classified as an aesthetic disruption. My fence was non-compliant material. Even my gravel driveway was cited as inconsistent with approved surfacing guidelines. The letter stated I had 14 days to begin remediation or face daily fines of $100 per violation. At the bottom was a signature in flowing blue ink. Karen Westfield, HOA Executive Director. I read it twice more, my coffee going cold beside me. This was nonsense, complete nonsense. I had never agreed to any association membership. My property was rural county land, not part of any development. I called the number printed on the letterhead. After navigating an unnecessarily complicated automated system, a woman answered with practiced cheerfulness. Sunrise Estates Homeowners Association. How may I direct your call? I need to speak with Karen Westfield, I said, keeping my voice level. May I ask what this is regarding? I received a letter with violations for property that is not under HOA jurisdiction. There was a pause. Your name and property address, please. I provided the information. Another pause, longer this time. One moment, please. The hold music was something bland and instrumental. It played for nearly 5 minutes before another voice came on the line. This is Karen Westfield. The voice was confident, authoritative, with a hint of impatience already present. I understand you have questions about your violation notice. I have questions about why I received any notice at all, I replied. My property is not part of Sunrise Estates. It never has been. Actually, she said, with the tone of someone explaining something simple to someone simple, there have been recent zoning adjustments approved by the County Planning Commission. Your property now falls within our expanded jurisdiction zone. The notification would have been sent to all affected properties. I never received any notification about zoning changes, I said. We cannot be responsible for whether residents check their mail, she replied dismissively. The point is, your property now needs to be brought up to community standards. The violations listed are quite serious. Serious to whom? I asked. My barn has been standing for 40 years. My fence keeps my dogs safe. There is nothing wrong with my property. Karen made a sound that might have been a laugh but contained no humor. What was acceptable before is not necessarily acceptable now. Standards evolve. Communities improve. Your rustic aesthetic is bringing down property values for everyone. Everyone who chose to build next to my pre-existing ranch, I pointed out. The guidelines are quite clear, she continued as if I had not spoken. You have 14 days to submit a remediation plan or the fines begin. I suggest starting with that eyesore you call a workshop. It is visible from 3 streets in our development. I took a deep breath. Ms. Westfield, I am not part of your development. I have never signed any HOA agreement. I do not recognize your authority over my property. That is unfortunate, she said, her voice hardening, because the county does recognize our authority. The expanded jurisdiction was approved last month. You can fight this and accumulate fines, or you can comply. Those are your options. I ended the call shortly after, my mind racing. Something did not add up. I needed to do research to understand what was really happening. That afternoon, I drove to my nearest neighbor, an elderly woman named Margaret who had lived on her small farm for decades. When I mentioned the HOA letter, her face darkened. They have been trying this with everyone along this road, she said, pouring me iced tea on her porch. The Johnsons sold last year because of it, could not afford the legal fight. The Hendersons, too. They cannot just claim jurisdiction over established properties, I said. Margaret looked at me with tired eyes. They have money and lawyers. They want this land for their next phase. They do not care about rules or rights. They care about getting what they want. I drove home with Margaret's words echoing in my mind. This was not about violations or community standards. This was a land grab disguised as bureaucracy. That night, I started a detailed log. Times, dates, names, and photographs of my property. I had a feeling I would need evidence of everything from now on. This was not just a misunderstanding. This was the opening move in a game I had not agreed to play. But if Karen Westfield wanted a fight, she had chosen the wrong opponent. The patrols began the very next day. The white SUV would drive slowly past my property, sometimes stopping across the road. Sometimes the observers would take photographs. Sometimes they would just watch. Always they would make notes. I continued my work as usual, but now I carried my phone at all times, documenting their presence. 2 days after my call with Karen, I spotted a man in an HOA vest placing something near my mailbox. I approached quietly, watching as he partially buried a small black device in the gravel. "Can I help you?" I called out when I was 10 feet away. The man jumped visibly, nearly dropping the small shovel he carried. Just routine maintenance," he stammered. "On my property?" I asked, pointing to the property marker post clearly visible nearby. "Community easement," he replied, regaining some composure. I stepped closer and looked down at the device. "And what exactly is that?" "Motion sensor," he admitted after a pause. "Standard security protocol." "For monitoring my private driveway?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. The man shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I just do what they tell me. Karen wants updates on this property, daily updates." "Remove it," I said firmly. "Now." He hesitated, glancing back toward the road where the white SUV was parked. "Remove it," I repeated. "Or I will, and then I will file a police report for trespassing and unauthorized surveillance." He quickly dug up the device and retreated to the waiting vehicle. I watched them drive away, my mind racing. This was beyond harassment now. This was invasion. That evening, I installed my own security system. Trail cameras at key points around the property. Motion-activated floodlights near the entrance. A comprehensive system that would alert me to any intrusion. The first alert came at 2:17 a.m. My phone buzzed with a notification. Someone was at the northern fence line. I reviewed the footage in real time. Two figures with flashlights examining my property boundaries. I saved the footage, added it to my growing documentation, and tried to go back to sleep. The next morning, Margaret called me, her voice shaking. "My chickens are gone," she said without preamble. "Someone left the coop open overnight, all 23 of them just gone." "Did you call the sheriff?" I asked. "Of course," she replied. "They took a report but said it was probably coyotes. It was not coyotes. The gate was unlatched, not broken. Coyotes do not unlatch gates." I drove over immediately to help her search, but we found nothing. As I was leaving, she grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Yesterday, that HOA woman came by, Karen, said my coop violated some code. I told her to leave. Last night, my chickens disappeared. You think that is coincidence?" I did not, but proving it would be another matter entirely. That afternoon, I drove to the sheriff's office to report the surveillance and trespassing. Deputy Miller took my statement, but his expression remained neutral throughout. "Not much we can do without clear evidence of criminal intent," he said, sliding my photographs back across his desk. "Homeowner association disputes are usually civil matters." "This is not a dispute," I explained again. "I am not in their association. They are trespassing on private property and installing surveillance equipment without consent." Deputy Miller sighed. "Look, I hear you, but these HOA types, they have lawyers on retainer. They know exactly how far they can push before crossing into criminal territory. My advice, get your own lawyer." I left feeling frustrated but more determined than ever. That night, my cameras caught 3 separate visits to my property boundaries. Each time, individuals in HOA vests examining, measuring, photographing. They were watching me, testing me, waiting for me to make a mistake or lose my temper. It was psychological warfare designed to wear me down until selling seemed like the easiest option. But they had miscalculated badly. This land was not just property to me. It was heritage, it was home, and I was just getting started with my defense. I found attorney James Harrington through a farmers' rights association. His office was modest but professional, located above a hardware store in the county seat. His hair was silver, his handshake firm, and his reputation formidable when it came to property disputes. "So they are claiming expanded jurisdiction based on recent zoning changes," he summarized after I had explained everything and shown him the letter. "May I see the zoning notice you received from the county?" "I never received one," I admitted. Harrington raised an eyebrow and began typing on his computer. After several minutes of searching public records, he made a sound somewhere between a snort and a laugh. "There is a proposed amendment to extend certain municipal codes to your area," he said, turning the screen so I could see. "Proposed, not approved, not ratified, not even scheduled for final vote yet." He clicked through several more pages. "The Planning Commission minutes from last month specifically tabled this proposal pending environmental impact studies. It has not moved forward." Hope sparked in my chest. "So they have no authority?" "None whatsoever," Harrington confirmed. "They are operating on a proposal as if it were law. That is at best a misunderstanding, at worst. Well, something more deliberate." We spent the next 2 hours building a strategy. First, documenting everything: the patrol visits, the surveillance attempts, the threatening letter, the conversation with Karen, Margaret's chickens, though that would be harder to prove. "We need to send a formal cease and desist immediately," Harrington said. "Then file for a restraining order against their patrols. Your trail cam footage is excellent evidence of harassment." "Will that stop them?" I asked. Harrington leaned back in his chair. "People like this Karen Westfield are used to intimidating their way to what they want. When someone pushes back with legal force, they often recalculate their approach." The cease and desist letter went out that afternoon by courier. It detailed the lack of legal jurisdiction, the evidence of trespassing, the unauthorized surveillance, and demanded all actions against my property cease immediately. Karen's response came the next day, not through legal channels, but as a voicemail on my phone. "This is Karen Westfield returning your legal correspondence." Her voice was tight, controlled. "I think there has been a misunderstanding about the status of the zoning updates. However, if you wish to escalate this matter, be advised that Sunrise Estates has strong relationships with the county commissioners and planning board. We would hate to see this become more complicated than necessary. I suggest a meeting to discuss a more amicable resolution." I played the voicemail for Harrington during our follow-up appointment. "That is a veiled threat," he said, his eyes narrowing, "and an admission that she knows the zoning change is not actually in effect. Save that recording." We filed for the restraining order that afternoon. We also began preparing a countersuit for harassment, intimidation, and malicious interference with property rights. "They want your land," Harrington explained as we reviewed documents. "Based on the development plans I pulled, Sunrise Estates has Phase 4 expansion mapped out, and it includes the exact acreage where you and your neighbors are located. They are not trying to make you comply with HOA rules. They are trying to make staying so miserable that you sell." As I drove home that evening, I noticed the white SUV parked near my turnoff. I slowed down, made deliberate eye contact with the driver, and took a photograph with my phone. Then I continued home, feeling something I had not felt since this began: confidence. They had picked this fight thinking I would be an easy target, a simple man with simple means who would crumble under pressure from people with money and influence. They had not counted on my determination. They had not counted on evidence. And they certainly had not counted on James Harrington. This was no longer just defense. This was counterattack. The first sign that things were changing came unexpectedly. An anonymous email from a Sunrise Estates address landed in my inbox one Tuesday morning. Not everyone on the board approved these actions. Karen has been operating beyond her authority. Some of us are concerned about potential liability. Documentation attached. The attachment contained internal HOA emails, meeting minutes, budget allocations for special security patrols that had not received proper board approval. One email exchange particularly caught my attention. The Phase 4 acquisition timeline requires expedited clearance of all non-conforming properties. KW authorized to proceed with compliance pressure on all targeted parcels. I forwarded everything to Harrington immediately. His response was swift. "This changes everything. The board members who did not approve these actions could be valuable witnesses. The phrase compliance pressure is especially troubling from a legal standpoint." The next day, my restraining order was granted. No HOA personnel could come within 100 feet of my property without prior written permission. The white SUV disappeared from its regular post. The night visits stopped. Then came the online reviews. Someone had created a thread on a local community forum about Sunrise Estates HOA practices. Residents began sharing their stories: excessive fines, selective enforcement, retribution against those who questioned authority. One homeowner wrote about being fined $500 because their approved beige exterior paint was deemed incorrect beige after application. Another described how their approved garden shed was suddenly non-compliant after they spoke against Karen at a meeting. The thread grew, 20 comments, 50, over 100 within days. A reporter from the county newspaper called me. She had seen the community forum and heard about the restraining order. She wanted my side of the story. I directed her to Harrington, who provided a carefully worded statement about property rights and abuse of authority. The article ran on Thursday. HOA overreach? Sunrise Estates accused of harassment and intimidation tactics. Karen went silent. No more letters, no more calls. The HOA website removed her weekly column about community standards. The patrol SUVs were nowhere to be seen. They are regrouping, Harrington warned me during our call. This is tactical retreat, not surrender. Now is the time to press forward. He was right. 3 days after the newspaper article, I received an official letter from the Sunrise Estates HOA board. It was markedly different in tone from Karen's previous communications. We wish to clarify that recent actions taken regarding your property were not sanctioned by the full board. We are conducting an internal review of all expansion activities and compliance measures. In the meantime, please consider all previous notices void. Harrington read the letter and smiled. They are running scared. The board is trying to distance itself from Karen's actions. This confirms what our anonymous source suggested. She was operating without full authorization. What happens now? I asked. Now we file the lawsuit, he said firmly. We have more than enough evidence of harassment, trespassing, and attempted intimidation. The emails suggest a deliberate campaign to pressure property owners to sell under false pretenses. That crosses several legal lines. The lawsuit was filed the next day. Copies were served to each board member individually, not just to the HOA as an entity. The local paper ran a follow-up story. The community forum exploded with new comments and allegations. Then came the call I had not expected. A man named Richard Bennett, identified as the Sunrise Estates HOA treasurer. This has gone too far, he said, his voice weary. Karen assured us everything was legal, that the zoning changes were just a formality, that residents outside our boundaries would welcome the property value increase from joining our community. None of that is true, I replied calmly. I am beginning to see that, he admitted. Several board members want to meet, without Karen, to discuss how to resolve this without further escalation. I referred him to Harrington, but the message was clear. The unified front was crumbling, the truth was emerging, and Karen Westfield's empire of intimidation was beginning to collapse from within. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. Polished wood, American flag, the smell of lemon polish and air conditioning. I sat beside Harrington at the plaintiff's table, my documentation in neat folders before us. The HOA's table was more crowded. Karen Westfield sat rigidly in the center, flanked by the HOA's attorney on one side and 2 board members on the other. She did not look in my direction once during the preliminary proceedings. Judge Alina Martinez presided. She was known for her no-nonsense approach to property disputes. She reviewed the filings with practiced efficiency before addressing the room. This case involves serious allegations of harassment, intimidation, and unlawful claims of authority, she summarized. Before we proceed, I understand the defendants have proposed a settlement offer. The HOA's attorney stood. Yes, Your Honor. My clients are prepared to rescind all notices, acknowledge the plaintiff's property is outside their jurisdiction, and offer compensation for any inconvenience. Harrington rose slowly. Your Honor, my client appreciates the offer, but believes the public interest requires a full hearing. This case represents a pattern of behavior affecting multiple property owners in the county. Judge Martinez nodded. Proceed with opening statements. What followed was Harrington at his finest. He laid out the timeline with precision, the false claims of jurisdiction, the intimidation tactics, the surveillance, the pattern of behavior designed to pressure property owners to sell. This is not about fence heights or barn colors, he concluded. This is about powerful interests using bullying tactics to acquire land they have no right to claim. The HOA's attorney offered a weaker response, focusing on miscommunications and overzealous enforcement rather than denying the core allegations. Then came the evidence phase, my photographs, my recordings, the internal emails, testimony from Margaret about her chickens, statements from 3 Sunrise Estates residents about similar intimidation tactics. The most damning moment came during Karen Westfield's testimony. Under Harrington's skilled questioning, her composure began to crack. So you were aware the zoning changes had not been approved when you sent the violation notices? He asked. I was informed they were essentially a done deal, she replied stiffly. By whom? By contacts at the Planning Commission. These would be the same contacts mentioned in your email of April 3rd, where you stated, and I quote, "Our friends at Planning will push this through regardless of the environmental studies. We just need to act as if it is already done." The color drained from Karen's face. That email had not been in our original evidence. It had arrived anonymously just 2 days before the hearing. I do not recall that specific communication, she said, her voice suddenly uncertain. Harrington presented the email. The judge reviewed it carefully. Ms. Westfield, Judge Martinez said, looking over her reading glasses, are you testifying under oath that you do not recall writing this? Karen's attorney requested a recess. When court resumed 20 minutes later, the HOA's position had changed dramatically. Your Honor, in light of new evidence, my clients wish to acknowledge wrongdoing and propose a revised settlement that addresses all of the plaintiff's concerns plus punitive damages. Judge Martinez turned to me. Mr. Harrington, does your client find this acceptable? Harrington consulted with me briefly, then stood. We are willing to consider a settlement under the following conditions: full acknowledgement of wrongdoing, permanent exclusion of my client's property from any future HOA expansion attempts, damages for harassment, and a court-ordered restructuring of the HOA board procedures to prevent similar abuses. The judge nodded. Counselors, prepare your settlement documents accordingly. This court will reconvene tomorrow to review the terms. As we left the courtroom, I caught Karen's eye for the first time. The imperious confidence was gone. In its place was something I recognized immediately: defeat. Spring came early that year. I watched it spread across my land like a blessing. Fresh grass in the pastures, new leaves on the old oak trees, the world renewing itself after a long winter. The legal battle had ended 3 months earlier with everything we had asked for. The settlement included a substantial payment for damages and legal fees. More importantly, it included ironclad protection for my property against any future HOA claims. The court had also ordered a complete restructuring of the Sunrise Estates governing board. with new bylaws specifically prohibiting the kind of tactics Karen had employed. Karen herself was gone, resigned from the board, moved away according to local gossip. The new board president, Richard Bennett, had implemented a more transparent approach to community governance. Life had returned to its peaceful rhythm. My morning walks with the dogs, my weekend work in the workshop barn, the satisfying physical labor of caring for the land. But something had changed, not just in the legal status of my property, but in the community around me. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves now stopped to talk when they saw me in town. Some shared their own stories of resisting pressure from Sunrise Estates. Others simply expressed admiration for someone who had stood his ground. Margaret's chicken flock had been replenished with help from a community fundraiser. Her small farm was thriving again. She waved cheerfully whenever I drove past. One Saturday morning, I was replacing shingles on my workshop roof when a vehicle pulled into my driveway. I recognized it immediately, one of the white SUVs that had once patrolled my boundaries. But it was different now. The HOA logos had been removed. The driver stepped out. I recognized him as one of the men who had first come onto my property all those months ago. He approached cautiously, stopping at a respectful distance. "Morning," he called up. "Remember me?" "I do," I replied, setting down my hammer. "Name is Thomas," he said. "I work private security now, not with the HOA anymore." I climbed down from the roof to speak with him properly. Up close, he seemed younger than I remembered. "What brings you by?" I asked. "Wanted to apologize," he said simply. "I was just doing what I was told back then, but that is not an excuse. Should have known better." I nodded, appreciating his directness. "Also wanted to thank you," he continued. "What you did, standing up like that, it changed things for a lot of people, not just property owners, staff too. Those of us working for the HOA were under the same kind of pressure." He extended his hand. "You have my respect, sir." The way he said, "Sir," this time was entirely different from that first encounter. There was no fear in it, no hesitation, just genuine respect from one man to another. We shook hands firmly. As he drove away, I looked out over my land, the fence lines standing strong, the workshop barn with its weathered wood and solid foundation, the house my grandfather had built with his own hands. This place had always been worth fighting for, but now it represented something more. Not just my freedom, but a reminder that standing firm against bullies does not just protect yourself. It creates ripples that protect others too. I returned to my roof work with renewed purpose. The land was mine, truly mine, not because of property deeds or court settlements, but because I had defended it when it mattered most. And that was something no homeowners association could ever take away.